Just kidding. Frank explained that maybe I could just let people know that the reason she wasn't here is because they were getting divorced. That is not true. There's absolutely no truth to that. But she did prepare a script that I can share with you. And as I think back and I remember the first time that I saw Jackie, I remember as I noticed her across a crowded room and she was standing in the shadows. And when she stepped into the light and I saw her face, our eyes locked instantly. Okay, we met in the bar. I was a freshman, we were both freshmen at the University of Wisconsin, and I was taking a study break, and she was treating Pete Christman to a beer for his birthday. Pete and I were roommates, and Jackie and Pete had been an item in Green Bay the summer before Jackie came to Madison. And we just happened to meet, and they were having a beer, and we said hello. But you know, the truth is that meeting at a bar doesn't have a negative connotation in Wisconsin like it does in some places. I mean, it's not like we were in Broad Ripple. Back home, going to a bar is something that you do with your family on the way home from church. Now, granted, I wasn't on the way home from church when I met Jackie, but as freshmen in Wisconsin, we were, just doing what freshmen do. And since Pete and Jackie weren't dating anymore, I saw more of her through him. We were just friends. But by the second semester, I was kind of like, I was telling Pete, and he said, Mike, forget it. It's never going to work. And I figured that, well, wait a minute. That's 40 years ago, and I've got to digress, because the only reason I'm here tonight is because Jackie told Ellen that we would do this. And because of a schedule conflict, she said, Michael, I've got 4 things going on tonight. I think you can handle this. So that's part of what our life is like. And she said, one of the things that makes you such a great husband is because you never complain about my schedule. I'm complaining tonight when I get home. But complaining was never part of our relationship because we both felt that when you have problems, you deal with it. You don't sidestep it, you don't ignore it, you don't pretend it's going away, you just deal with it. And early in our relationship, before we were married, and then 2 years after we were married, we were commuting between Wisconsin and Indiana. And at that time, before the advent of cell phones and internet, our combined phone bills were more than our house payment. So Jackie said, okay, I've got a rule. We won't talk about the phone bill, and on the weekends we commute, we're not going to take out the garbage. She knew that if this long-term relationship, this long-distance relationship was going to work, the time together had to be stress-free. So 40 years later, we still don't talk about the phone bills, and I take out the garbage. But our relationship wasn't always so confident. And when I confided in Pete that it was like, he said, it won't work out, I figured he knew what he was talking about because he was a chemistry major. And I was head over heels in love, and I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue how to express it. And looking back, my parents were such wonderful role models, but they really were very rigid in their, I'm the daddy, you're the mommy. And that was very common from their generation. And those of you who know Jackie realize that she is not a you're the mommy kind of person. I mean, she just didn't accept those kind of roles. And in the beginning, I thought that Jackie was everything that my mother wasn't. But in time, I realized that my mother was everything that Jackie aspired to be. They are both very strong, wise, passionate, very compassionate women. They came from very different generations, so they had different options. My mother never went to high school. Jackie was the first in her family who went to college and got a master's degree. Now, during college, Jackie's patience was the safety net between our relationship because I was very much the timid one, and my idea of romance was a few yellow roses and a note that said, "I like you." Now, I was terrified of anything that resembled a commitment. I mean, it just wasn't in my fabric. And if she waited patiently, Jackie made plans to graduate a semester early, and she was going to go to Munich, where she would work as an au pair for an American family. She departed from O'Hare Airport on New Year's Eve in 1973. And a snowstorm stranded her in New York, and she stayed there for New Year's Eve alone in Times Square. We wrote regularly, and she told me about the beauty of Munich in the spring, how much she loved going to the opera, the enjoyment of the small children for whom she cared. And then I wrote to say on June 24th I was leaving for India to join the Peace Corps. I will call you at 2 o'clock on Easter Sunday. We can talk about it, I wrote. The call didn't go as I planned. I didn't expect the stoic tears or the offer to come back early before I left. Why would you want to come back from Germany? I asked. Jackie understood that absence makes the heart grow fonder, but she also understood that prolonged absence can lead to drifting apart, and that was not a risk that she was willing to take. On June 10th, she drove into the driveway of our farm where I was working while I was waiting for my departure date. 14 days later, I was standing on the tarmac outside a North Central Airlines DC-10 with her family and my family, and I said goodbye to her brother, I said goodbye to her dad or her mom, and I said goodbye to my father, and I turned to embrace my mother, and I said, I think I'm going to cry. And my mother said, "No, you're not. You're going to get on that airplane." And I promptly obeyed her. It wasn't until I was strapped into my street I realized I hadn't said goodbye to Jackie. No embrace, no kiss, no eye contact. For the first time in my life, I realized I am in big trouble. On July 5th, I arrived in New Delhi, and Jackie's first letter was written with restraint. She talked of picking strawberries and making jam. But within time, the letters took on a very familiar pattern, like speaking with your best friend. And I talked about the cultural fascination of northern India, the food, the people. And she talked about graduate school and about being back in Madison and her first job in Rockford. In Rockford, she was working as a branch manager for the Rockford Public Library. But then in January of 1976, she took on a second job as a waitress at the Crown and Round so she could earn enough money to come to India in September when I finished my volunteer duties. Now, explaining Jackie's identity to my co-workers and friends in India was really requiring crossing a very broad cultural divide, because the word girlfriend doesn't exist in Punjabi. And when I said Jackie married Doskudia, people had no idea when I used the literal translation. So I asked my Punjabi instructor, well, what should I say? He said, well, use mangeter, which is an Urdu word for fiance. That got equally confusing, and he said, well, just say, Jackie meri boti hai. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, Jackie's my wife. So all of a sudden, I was able to overcome my concern about commitment. In 3 easy steps, she went from girlfriend to wife. Well, Jackie arrived in Delhi in September, and we traveled for 6 weeks throughout India. And there were times when it was very difficult. I can remember saying, Jackie, no, you cannot have any alcohol. I had asked her to bring over a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label, and when the man in the household gathered to have a drink, she was expected to stay in the kitchen. And she threatened to take the bottle back. And then about 2 days later, after traveling in a crowded vehicle for 8 hours, she wasn't feeling well. So Masi Ji brought her a shot of the whiskey, and she said, Sharab nahi hai, dawai hai. meaning don't think of it as alcohol, think of it as medicine. Now, Jackie didn't warm to the suggestion, and she doesn't like being told what to do. So that didn't work out. But our trip was really filled with all kinds of examples that really brought out the best of Jackie. And as we were driving through Madras, our bus veered off the road as a small child ran in front of the bus, and the bus had to turn to avoid it. And the bus headed right into a canal that was running parallel with the road. And from the back of the bus, we watched in horror as the water came through the windshield, and the windshield shattered, and the bus rested on its side. And as the water came rushing through the windows, we scrambled through the windows on the opposite side to get out of the bus. And as a traveling companion and I were in the canal trying to find his glasses, I watched Jackie as she had her arms around a small child, feeding it sections of oranges. Later she admitted, I don't know who was more frightened, me or the little girl. But she was so compassionate about taking care of that small child. Now, during my 2 years in India, I became very, very close to the family of one of my Punjabi co-workers. And during the last leg of our trip, we were at his uncle's house, and his sister asked me, please take my brother to America. We talked about this before. It wasn't the first time it was brought up. And I can't think of another person who would have been willing to take on the sacrifice that would eventually involve to accept another person into your family. Surinder Paul Singh came with us to America. We helped him get his green card. And 34 years later, he was a pallbearer at Jackie's father's funeral. There's no telling what might have happened if Jackie hadn't come to India, but I do know that her being there really helped me in my transition back into America when I returned from India. Within 6 months, she had gotten a job, and I started my career in agricultural marketing. And from that point on, we had that delicate balance of managing career and family. But that balance has been much easier because we've been willing to share the lead. And like geese in flight, we just silently pass the baton without losing stride. And we can do that because we respect the roles that each brings to the relationship. And we're not afraid to step in when we recognize that someone else needs help. And that was especially apparent when our son Patrick was born. The only sore point for Jackie was that all of my childbearing analogies involved Holstein Friesians. I tell her, Jackie, don't worry about it. There's only 3 things to remember. Keep him dry, out of a draft, and give him plenty of liquids. And when she got mastitis, and I told her I had a lot of experience with that, she wasn't really too excited about it. But Jackie regrets that she's not able to be here tonight because she really appreciates how our love had changed and it's matured as our life has changed. And we don't even mind now how we each complete our sentences as we're talking because midstream we typically forget what we're saying. And that reminds me of my parents because my father had a stroke and near the end of his life he was unable to process information, so he couldn't find the words for what he was thinking, and they'd go out for dinner and they'd go up and say, Joe, what would you like to have a drink? And he'd turn to my mother and he'd say, Lorraine, what do you recommend? And she'd say, I think you'd like a Miller Lite. Because she knew that he couldn't answer the question. And I think that for us, love has meant many things, but the most enduring has been to remain best friends. And yes, it's funny how we have lovers.